At the same time, there's some very troubling news out of Ukraine. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. The Biden administration, with less than 2 months left in office, has dramatically changed U.S. policy in Ukraine, allowing Ukraine to use long-range U.S. missiles to strike inside of Russia. The president, for the first time, authorized the Ukrainian military to use the ATACMS, the ATACMS, to help defend its forces in the Kursk region. Now, this is particularly insane for a number of reasons. One is that this was considered a red line for Russian President Vladimir Putin, which he has said repeatedly and said if you do so, then NATO will be considered an active military target and participant in this war. Second is that if you actually look, Krystal, at the military operation where this is happening, this is to support a Ukrainian invasion of Russia. So this is Ukraine's invasion of Kursk, where they crossed an internationally recognized border with a military operation and are now facing a Russian offensive of Russian troops and some 50,000 North Korean elite special forces. We are using these long-range missiles for Ukraine to strike inside of internationally recognized sovereign Russian territory. Now, two wrongs don't make a right, correct? You know, if your entire case is they illegally invaded us, they took our territory and all this, and you're like, oh, well, we're gonna invade you to show you who's boss. It's like, okay, philosophically, you know, I can understand that. But if your entire case is around having the entire world support your democratization project and all of that, it's like, well, then it gets a little bit complicated. And so already we can confirm as of this morning that the first long-range missile was used inside of Russia. But second, if you read inside of it, they say they do not expect this to change the course of the war. They do not expect this to change the course of this offensive. At best, you know, you can kill a few more North Koreans or Russians. So it's not even strategically going to really change the outcome. And then finally, I think this is a really disgusting move because what I think is happening is that they are trying, number one, Anthony Blinken said they're gonna push every dollar out to Ukraine that they possibly and legally can while they're in office. And two, I think that they're trying to set the standard for Donald Trump and his administration in office so that they are then forced to try and get headlines in the media being like Donald Trump reverses the policy of missiles, you know, long-range missiles that are being used inside of Russia and allowed for the Ukrainian forces. It's a deep state, tried and true thing. They did it to Obama as well whenever he was coming into office. And so the entire policy is nuts. The entire policy is crazy.
I think the idea is that Ukraine feels like if Trump is coming into office, there is a decent chance, we don't know for sure if this is going to happen or not, but there's a decent chance that he's going to force some kind of a peace settlement.
Yes.
And they want to be able to have something they can trade for their own territory in that settlement. And so the idea is if they can be successful in this, I'm not validating, I'm just explaining the logic. If they can be successful in this, you know, Russian attack and invasion and have some territory in Russia that they hold, that they can use that as a bargaining chip to come out in a better position after these negotiations. So I think that's ultimately what's going on here, and that doesn't undercut what you said, Saagar, of the level of danger of allowing this to unfold. I do think it's unlikely that Putin, because he also is seeing the same landscape of like, let's wait and see what Trump does when he comes in. I think it's unlikely that he reacts in the most aggressive and hostile way of like actively attacking a NATO country or, you know, using nukes or something like that. But, you know, you're running a risk, and that's kind of a wild thing to do.
Look at already what they're doing. You know, again, Ukraine is losing. They have been losing territory consistently for months. We've been focused on the election, so we haven't been able to cover it. But put this up there on the screen. I mean, the largest missile attack on Ukrainian infrastructure literally just happened a couple of days ago. It's a disaster over there for them. I mean, their population already, the latest poll that has come out shows that 52% of Ukrainians want to pursue a negotiated settlement. That's up almost 30% over the last couple of years. Also, let's put this on the screen from the Wall Street Journal. Trump's push for the Ukraine peace finds, quote, growing acceptance in Europe. Germany, arguably the country with the most to lose, and, you know, the balance of power and all of that, their chancellor has said, no way, we're not sending more long-range missiles or escalating the war in Ukraine, we'll provide them with basic military assistance. But their red lines they're sticking to because they have real stakes. They also know they don't have the money to continue this war without the colossal amount of funds the United States has been pushing into this conflict. So all the signs point to what is obviously best for everybody, Ukraine, Russia, and for the entire world. Let's end the war now. Nobody is going to win, the Russians or the Ukrainians. Although, and I will at least give the counter case, John Mearsheimer doesn't believe a negotiated settlement will happen because he goes, look, Russia's already winning the war. Why would they do it? Russia and the Putin regime, specifically the Putin regime, has very little respect for human life. They don't care, right? A couple 100,000 people are dead, whatever. For some reason in Russia, they seem to be okay with that, especially the government. Well, now you've got these elite, North Korean forces who are with you. You've got North Korea giving you ammunition. You've got Iran producing these suicide drones. You're actually rolling back the territory. You've got the sunk cost fallacy of a couple 100,000 people maybe, we don't nobody knows the number, but have died on the front line. The Ukrainians are failing. Why would I negotiate now? Like in a certain sense, they have the least amount of incentive right now to negotiate. So I'm hoping that Donald Trump can actually change that and bring this to some sort of bigger settlement and convince Putin that it's not in his best interest. But the deck is arrayed against them. It has been for years. Nobody wants to listen. Today is the 1,000th day, apparently, of the Ukraine war, which is crazy. And if you consider, like, all of the macro, strategic, and economic picture points in one direction: more Ukrainian territory lost. The more that they push this, the longer that it prolongs, you will see the age will continue to tick up in the Ukrainian military. The population will continue to suffer, food, energy cost, all of this. Already, a huge percent of the country is left. Their best and the brightest have left long ago. So they have massive problems. And worse, really, is the escalation trying to tie the Trump administration's hands. And like you said, pray and hope that this doesn't backfire. Do I think Putin is going to attack us over it? No. But, do I think it still crosses certain red lines and gives a lot of incentives inside of the Russian military for how they should think very differently about approaching the West, and even any hope of a rapprochement with them that lasts longer than Donald Trump, which is what I think everybody should like to see. So I don't know. And the North Korea thing, just final point, we've talked about, the fact that some thousands of troops that are in Russia is a failure of Biden foreign policy. Donald Trump had a policy of engagement with North Korea. That was great because we actually had good relations. There were no missiles flying around, whatever. Biden came in, we immediately reverted to maximum pressure and sanctions. And what do? Of course, they go to China and Russia, right back to where they were. And now there's troops on the Ukraine front line. This could easily have been prevented. If we have diplomatic relations, then we're fine. Their nuclear program, by the way, nothing has happened to it. Plot twist over the last 4 years of maximum pressure on their thing. It's the same story with Iran, with Venezuela. After you reach a certain critical mass, it's not sanctions on all this. It will do nothing. To do
how many years have we had sanctions on Cuba? What is that?
60? Yeah. Actually, maybe more. Yeah.
It's just insane. One last point on the European leaders and the call with Olaf Scholz and all of that, because I think that's very significant, is not only do they see the writing on the wall in terms of this war, which has gone on for far too long, where the U.S. and the U.K. banded together to block any sort of potential peace deal at the beginning. That really was the failure, because that was the time when Russia was in the most precarious position, where it was unclear how people would respond politically, where it was unclear how much the sanctions would bite, where it was unclear how much the loss of life would create instability, within the country itself. They've weathered all those storms. So that continues to have been the real failing and missed opportunity in this war. But I think also a lot of these leaders are looking at the fact that, I did a monologue yesterday about how Democrats' commitment to genocide in Gaza, and also a number of voters mentioned the war in Ukraine, was part of what turned them off from voting for Democrats again. Because, even as you still see pretty decent levels of support for Ukraine, like Americans are sympathetic to the cause, but they also got the accurate sense from Joe Biden in particular, but by extension Kamala Harris, that this is what he actually cared about. he didn't really care that much that you couldn't afford groceries, that your budget was stretched tight, that you couldn't imagine ever even being able to become a homeowner. Like, the only thing he could really talk about was NATO and AUKUS and like this, visions of grandeur with regard to this imagined fight between democracy and autocracy, where we're the good guys when manifestly, with regard to our actions in Gaza, we are not the good guys. So I think they also are reading the political tea leaves, not just here, of how this had an impact on the election and helped to bring Trump back to the White House. But you see parties throughout Europe that are both on the right and on the left who are critics of the European and the American policy vis-a-vis Ukraine, who are on the rise. And, there's a number of factors that go into that, but Ukraine is certainly one of them. And so I think that's the other piece, is not only reading the tea leaves and the writing on the wall with regard to the status of the war and how things are likely to go in the future, but also looking out for their own political survival and realizing that there is, there's a real political backlash to this endless support for Ukraine in what is at this point a hopeless cause.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, ultimately, this just feeds more into the Biden failure. His legacy was NATO, and now a guy is getting elected explicitly, at least with a pledge, we'll see what he does, to end the war that he said was so vital and critical to U.S. policy and security. I will say, I'm an AUKUS fan too, so love AUKUS.
But that's outside an AUKUS voter.
I'm not an AUKUS voter. I appreciate the Anglosphere, and I think that is how we should have relations, rather than some bullshit treaty from 80 years ago about why I'm supposed to go and die for North Montenegro or whatever.
I think we should have, just as a final close, I think we should, and I think we both do, have some skepticism of what Trump will actually do here, because he has said a bunch of different things. Obviously, you've got Marco Rubio and a bunch of neocons that he's put into key positions. There's a reason why, even though he made overtures to withdraw from Afghanistan, why he didn't do it. Because look at the political cost that Joe Biden paid for actually doing what voters had claimed they wanted and withdrawing from Afghanistan. Because guess what? Anytime you try to disentangle yourself from one of these conflicts, it can be really ugly. And the press almost uniformly
they'll kill you
turns against you. And the leaks from the generals about, it could genuinely be damaging to his presidency, and he's no fool. So, ultimately, he doesn't care outside of his own, self-preservation. So if he looks at the landscape and is like, this isn't good for me politically, I don't think, it's not crazy to imagine that he takes a very different approach than what he at times signaled on the campaign trail, and he wasn't even consistent in what he signaled on the campaign trail.
That's right. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.